The year is 532 AD. Welcome to Constantinople, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire. Usually, it is a city of gold, silk, and absolute power. But today, it is literally on fire. Half the capital has been reduced to smoking ash. Why? Because of a chariot race. Yes, seriously. The infamous Nika Riots saw rival sports fans unite, burn down the city center, and try to overthrow the emperor. Emperor Justinian was terrified. He actually packed his bags and was ready to flee the city on a small boat. But his wife, Empress Theodora, looked at him and basically said, "Purple makes a fine burial shroud. I am staying." Suitably shamed, Justinian stayed. He sent in his military, crushed the rebellion, and killed 30,000 rioters. When the smoke cleared, Justinian stood victorious. But his public image was an absolute disaster. He needed a PR miracle. He needed to build something so monumental that people would forget the massacre. He looked at the smoldering ruins of the city's main church, the original Hagia Sophia. "I will not just rebuild it," he declared. "I will build a church that makes the heavens jealous." He wanted the largest interior space in the world, crowned by a massive floating dome. The only problem? Roman architecture had not evolved much in centuries. Traditional builders said it was impossible. So, Justinian fired the traditional builders. He did not want bricklayers. He wanted mad geniuses. He summoned two nerds who had never built a church in their lives, a mathematician and a physicist. Meet Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. They were not your typical master masons. They were theoretical academics, a geometer and a physicist. And Justinian gave them a deadline that was, frankly, insulting: 5 years. For context, famous medieval cathedrals in Europe would later take nearly 2 centuries to finish. To pull this off, they could not just build. They had to invent a completely new architectural language. Here was the core problem. A traditional basilica is essentially a rectangular box, but Justinian wanted a massive circular dome on top of it. Putting a round dome on a square room leaves huge structural gaps at the 4 corners. Gravity dictates that the whole thing should immediately collapse and crush everyone inside. They needed a bridge, a way to smoothly transition the square floor into the circular roof. Their solution? A stroke of absolute mathematical genius known as the pendentive. By building 4 curved triangular corner segments, they could seamlessly merge the square base into a perfect circle. These pendentives gathered the crushing weight of the massive dome and funneled it safely down into 4 gigantic stone piers. The math was flawless on parchment, but building a dome over 100 feet wide in real life? To make it stand, they needed the best materials on Earth. So, Justinian decided to just take them from everyone else. To build Hagia Sophia in record time, Justinian did not quarry new stone. He essentially recycled the ancient world. He ordered his governors to strip columns from abandoned pagan temples, including the famous Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, massive slabs of green marble from Thessaly, yellow stone from Syria, and imperial purple porphyry from Egypt. Imagine dragging a 20-ton stone column across the desert without modern machinery, loading it onto a tiny wooden ship, and praying it does not sink in the Mediterranean Sea. Soon, Constantinople was flooded with a mountain of imported, stolen luxury materials. Next, he drafted a literal army of 10,000 workers. To speed things up, Justinian split them into 2 teams of 5,000, racing against each other. He supposedly hid gold coins in the rubble to keep them digging and working at breakneck speed. The foundations were laid, and the massive stone piers began to rise. Anthemius and Isidore watched nervously. Everything had to be mathematically perfect. But to make the structure flexible against earthquakes, they used a special, extremely thick mortar. Here is where the speed of the project caused a massive, hilarious disaster. Because they built the walls so fast, the thick mortar did not have time to dry and cure. The immense weight of the arches pushed the wet walls outward. The church was literally bending. Anthemius and Isidore screamed for everyone to stop. If they added one more brick, the whole thing would collapse. Their solution was simple, but infuriating to the emperor. They had to sit down and wait for the mud to dry. Justinian hated waiting. But architecture obeys physics, not emperors. To fix the leaning walls, they introduced semidomes, massive half-circle structures added to the sides. These semidomes acted like giant buttresses, pushing back against the outward weight of the main dome. Physics 1, gravity 0. With the base finally solid and straight, it was time for the main event, the Great Dome. But building a dome over 100 feet wide out of standard solid stone would be too heavy. So, they cheated. They imported special sponge-like clay bricks from the island of Rhodes. They were so light they could float on water. With these miracle bricks, the dome soared into the sky, finishing the central structure faster than anyone thought possible. But Justinian did not just want a roof. He wanted a theatrical illusion. So, right at the base of the massive dome, where the structural stress is highest, they punched 40 arched windows. Any normal builder would say this weakens the dome. But mathematically, these windows acted as relieving arches, deflecting cracks. Visually, it created absolute magic. Sunlight flooded through the continuous ring of 40 windows. The intense glare washed out the stone between the windows. It made the colossal dome look like it was completely disconnected from the earth, as if suspended from heaven by a golden chain. On December 27, 537 AD, just 5 years and 10 months after the riots, the doors were ready to open. Emperor Justinian arrived in his chariot, not as a scared ruler who almost fled the city, but as a conqueror. He left his guards outside and walked through the massive bronze doors entirely alone. As he reached the silver altar under the Great Dome, he looked up at his creation. He threw his hands to the heavens and shouted, "Solomon, I have outdone thee." A massive flex, comparing himself to the biblical King Solomon, who built the legendary First Temple in Jerusalem. But this ultimate architectural flex came with an astronomical price tag. Building Hagia Sophia cost an estimated 20,000 pounds of pure gold. That is, hundreds of millions of solidus coins. To put that into perspective, it practically emptied the imperial treasury overnight. Byzantine tax collectors had to aggressively squeeze every corner of the empire to pay for Justinian's dream. But you can see where the money went. The interior was lavish beyond comprehension. The altar alone used 40,000 pounds of silver. Over 4 acres of interior surface, walls and ceilings, were covered entirely in pure gold mosaics. It was filled with holy relics and designed specifically to make anyone who entered feel small, overwhelmed, and completely inferior. Anthemius and Isidore, our 2 exhausted nerds, had actually achieved the impossible. Justinian's PR disaster was officially erased. He was not just an emperor anymore. He was God's chosen architect. For 20 years, the Great Church stood as a symbol of Byzantine invincibility. But nature has a funny way of humbling emperors. Between 553 and 557 AD, a series of massive earthquakes struck Constantinople. The problem was the original dome. It was too flat, a shallow saucer dome. Because it was so flat, the immense weight pushed outward horizontally rather than straight down. The earthquakes widened the cracks. In May 558, the unthinkable happened. The massive main dome completely collapsed, destroying the holy altar below. Justinian was reportedly devastated. His ultimate PR stunt was lying in pieces. He needed his architects. Unfortunately, Anthemius and Isidore had already passed away. So he called upon the next best thing, Isidore the Younger, the nephew of the original architect. The Younger surveyed the rubble and immediately saw his uncle's mistake. The dome was too heavy and too flat. His solution? Make it taller. He redesigned it into a true ribbed hemisphere. By raising the pitch, the immense weight was directed straight downward into the pillars instead of pushing outward. They rebuilt it using 40 distinct ribs, making it lighter but vastly stronger. They also used even lighter materials, just to be absolutely sure gravity would not win this time. By 562 AD, the new dome was finished. It stood 20 feet taller than the original. This is the dome you see today, a masterpiece of engineering that has survived empires, crusades, and endless earthquakes for 1,500 years. But wait, we skipped one tiny detail. How did they physically lift massive 40-ton pillars without modern cranes? Human muscle and simple pulleys were not enough for the upper levels. The answer was wonderfully primitive. Dirt. A massive mountain of dirt. As the walls went up, the builders simply filled the inside of the church with earth, creating giant ramps. Oxen and men would drag the heavy columns up the gentle dirt slopes and roll them into place. And when the roof was finally done, they just grabbed their shovels and dug all the dirt back out. But Hagia Sophia was more than just a place of worship. It was the ultimate weapon of psychological warfare. In the 10th century, envoys from the Kievan Rus, basically rugged Vikings, arrived in the city looking for a new religion. They stepped inside Hagia Sophia, and their jaws literally dropped. They famously reported back to their king, "We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth." That single building was so overwhelmingly beautiful, it convinced the entire Russian Empire to convert to Orthodox Christianity. But not everyone was easily impressed. Meet the Varangian Guard, the emperor's elite Viking mercenaries. During one particularly long and boring church sermon, a Viking guard pulled out his dagger and started carving into the sacred marble balcony. To this day, you can still find his ancient runic graffiti. It literally translates to, "Halfdan was here." It just proves that no matter how holy or intimidating a building is, people will always be people. Fast forward exactly 900 years. It is 1453, and the unbeatable Byzantine Empire has finally fallen to the Ottoman Turks. The young Sultan, Mehmed the Conqueror, rode straight to Hagia Sophia. Instead of destroying it, he walked in, looked up, and was completely stunned. He immediately declared it a mosque. Over the years, the Ottomans added 4 towering minarets to the exterior. Inside, Islamic law forbade images of faces, so the glittering Christian mosaics were respectfully plastered over. Almost 500 years passed. The Ottoman Empire fell, and the modern Republic of Turkey was born. In 1935, Turkey's first president, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, decided the building belonged to the whole world. He turned it into a museum. Restorers carefully peeled back the centuries of plaster, revealing the glittering Byzantine mosaics underneath. For decades, it stood as the ultimate architectural hybrid. Massive black shields of Islamic calligraphy hanging right next to Christian angels. It became one of the most visited tourist attractions on Earth. Then, in 2020, history turned another page. The museum status was revoked, carpets were rolled out, and it became a working mosque once again. But labels do not define Hagia Sophia. This building has survived riots, fires, earthquakes, crusaders, and the rise and fall of absolute empires. It is a towering monument to one emperor's insane ego, and to the brilliant, terrified nerds who figured out the math to make it stand. For 15 centuries, the Golden Dome has floated above the Bosphorus, and it is not coming down anytime soon. If you enjoyed surviving this architectural nightmare with us, hit that subscribe button for more History Unlocked. See you next time.